A couple weeks ago, I made a video looking at the 10 worst quarterbacks to win a Super Bowl. That was more so about the quarterback's career. In this video, I'm going to be looking at some of the best playoff runs by a quarterback that did not end in a Super Bowl ring. Because this video is in such detail, I'm only going to do 5 as opposed to 10. And I also have a nice little formula that I started that I think you'll enjoy. This is everything but the ring, the 5 best playoff runs that ended with nothing. The video begins right after this. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, DraftKings. What's up, basketball fans? The season is starting to heat up with bigger plays and even bigger wins. Today, I've teamed up with DraftKings, who have a brand new way to play daily fantasy sports. With DraftKings Pick6, all new customers get a 100% deposit match up to $100 in Pick6 credits when you deposit just $5 or more. Get in on the action right now. Getting started is simple. Just download the DraftKings Pick6 app and sign up using code BARRY. The crown is yours. Select 2 to 6 basketball players and choose if they're going to have more or less of a stat, such as points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, you name it. There are plenty of options to choose from. You can track your lineup and compete against others for a shot at huge cash prizes. So download the DraftKings Pick6 app now and sign up with code BARRY. New customers can get a 100% deposit match up to $100 in Pick6 credits when they deposit just $5. That's code BARRY only on DraftKings Pick6. The crown is yours. Now, before I dive into the video, I want to explain some of the numbers that you're going to see throughout the video. I've been working on some things and I've come up with defensive adjusted numbers for every quarterback. Basically, I've looked at how a quarterback performs against a defense and then compare that to how other NFL quarterbacks performed against those same defenses. It takes a lot of time. As you see in this picture, it says 17.5 next to Joe Montana. That means that Joe Montana's career passer rating is 17.5 points better than his peers were against the same defenses that he played. That's pretty good. But that's not quite as important as this next one. Total value. Total value is the difference between playoff opponents' adjusted net yards per attempt allowed in the regular season and the quarterback's adjusted net yards per attempt that postseason versus those teams multiplied by that quarterback's dropbacks that postseason. Confused? Don't worry. For example, in 1989, Joe Montana had a plus 7.66 adjusted net yards per attempt, meaning his adjusted net yards per attempt was 7.66 points higher than the 3 opponents' defenses usually allowed, and he did that on 84 dropbacks. So all you got to do, 7.66 times 84, and you get a value of 643.4. By my calculations, these are the 11 most successful Super Bowl winning title runs by defensive adjusted total value, and it seems to pass the smell test if you really look at it. Shout out Nick Foles. For all these playoff runs, I decided to go game by game, see how much value each of these guys had, in addition with traditional stats, and also how their overall playoff run finished in terms of value. Before I begin, I want to look at some of the honorable mentions that just missed the cut, starting with 2012 Colin Kaepernick. Now, Kaepernick had great passing value, but really he dominated on the ground, especially versus the Packers. However, he came up just short in the Super Bowl versus the Ravens, leading a furious comeback. That was the peak of his career, and you all know what happened after that. 2009 Peyton Manning. We all remember 2009 Peyton Manning for his pick 6 to end the Super Bowl loss versus the Saints, but many forget his absolutely dominant performance in the AFC Championship game that year versus the Jets that got the Colts to the Super Bowl. This is the closest that Peyton Manning ever had to having a clean title run. Ken Anderson, 1981. Didn't have a single outstanding performance, but his AFC Championship game performance versus the Chargers when it was a literal fucking blizzard and I think like negative 70 wind chill deserves recognition, as does his Super Bowl performance where the Bengals were a couple of goal line touchdown runs away from winning the championship. Basically Joe Burrow for Joe Burrow, but more efficient with better metrics than 2021 Joe Burrow. The next one, you've heard of this one, 1984 Dan Marino. His first 2 games in the 84 postseason were about as good as it gets, and his performance in the AFC Championship game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers is the single best game on the list, but getting blown out in the Super Bowl, the only one he would ever play in, knocks him as he ended up throwing just 1 touchdown with 2 picks and had negative value. Still, hell of a postseason. And finally, I went with 2021 Patrick Mahomes. His first 2 playoff games versus Pittsburgh, and then the famous 13 seconds game versus the Bills, where he had in both games a massive amount of value. Unfortunately, after another dominant first half in the AFC Championship game where he threw 3 more touchdowns, having 11 touchdown passes through 2.5 games. Remember, the single season postseason mark for touchdown passes is 11. That's why I put him here. He had one of the worst halves halves of his career in the second half and overtime versus the Bengals, and had a negative 61.5 value. That's why I couldn't put him in the top 5. But that's okay. He rebounded by winning the next 2 championships anyway. And now we get on to the list. Number 5, 2017 Tom Brady. Oh, how my heart fills with joy to see Thomas on this list. God knows he has a number of Super Bowl runs that he won that he didn't deserve. If only he had about 4 or 5 more of these. He ended up winning a default MVP that season, throwing for nearly 4,600 yards, 32 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. Yeah, the guy was really good. What are you going to do about it, huh? Patriots had the best offense in the league, and despite some rocky moments, their defense finished 6th in points allowed per drive, so the idea of Brady carrying this team, in the regular season at least, really isn't liable. But if you look at his numbers, pretty good numbers. Not even one of, I would say, his 5 best seasons, but hey, timing is everything. But he would step it up in the postseason. In the divisional round versus the Titans, he threw for 337 yards, 3 touchdowns, including a touchdown pass, quote unquote, to James White, in a dominant 35-14 win over the Titans. This was a game the Patriots were expected to win, and they did. Brady had a solid game, not great. His passing value number, 83.7, very good, not great. But the last 2 games of the 2017 postseason are what helped Brady make this list, including his performance versus the Jaguars in the AFC Championship game. Jaguars, as we all know, that were Saxonville for that one year. They had the best defense in the league. Tom Brady cut his hand. He led a fourth quarter comeback thanks to Miles Jack not being down, and the Patriots won 24-20. Overall, Brady finished with 290 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 108.4 passer rating. But because of the Jaguars' incredible defense, his passing value was an amazing 164.4. That was nothing compared to what he did in the Super Bowl versus my Eagles. In a game that featured no punts, Tom Brady ended up throwing for over 505 yards and 3 touchdowns with a 115.4 rating. He might have had a couple dropped interceptions and a dropped catch, and he did have a game-losing fumble. But by all accounts, if there's any game Brady fans can point to say where Brady got robbed or held back by his defense, this is obviously it. He had a monstrous value of 310.2 points above average against the Eagles, and he did it on so many dropbacks, and yet he came up short, which was just so amazing. Thank you so much, Tom, for fumbling. Overall, his entire postseason run, the best statistical postseason run of his career by a wide margin, to be honest with you. Over 1,130 yards, 8 touchdowns, no picks, 108.6 rating. Looking at it from another perspective, he had 558.3 passing value in 3 playoff games. The reason I don't have this higher is because 1, I hate Brady, and 2, because he was directly responsible for the game-losing turnover, and also he probably shouldn't have even made the Super Bowl because Miles Jack wasn't down. But overall, the guy balled out that postseason, and he deserved to make this list. Number 4, 1990 Jim Kelly. You remember the K-Gun offense, right? Well, the K-Gun offense was spurned from a playoff loss the year before, and Jim Kelly and the Bills launched a mini AFC dynasty because of it. In 1990, Kelly didn't even throw for 3,000 yards, but he completed over 63% of his passes, which is a lot for back then. 24 touchdowns, only 9 interceptions, and a stellar passer rating of 101.2. The Bills had a 13-3 record, but they ramped it up big time come playoff time. Versus fellow 1983 draft classmate Dan Marino, Jim Kelly and the Bills put a whooping on the Dolphins' ass, winning 44-34. Kelly himself threw for 339 yards on just 29 pass attempts, averaging 11.7 yards per attempt. He threw 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, a 125.5 rating. He had an insane passing value of 231.7 and helped the Bills march on to the AFC Championship game versus the Raiders, where it was an even bigger can of whoop ass. The Bills defeated the Raiders 51-3, which still seems unbelievable, and Kelly did more than enough, throwing once again for 300 yards on just 23 pass attempts, averaging 13 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Most of the Bills' touchdowns came on the ground or defensively. It was at this point that everybody thought the Bills were going to run over the Giants because they were playing a backup quarterback in the Super Bowl, and Jim Kelly was in the midst of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, postseason ever. But we all know how the Super Bowl ended. Kelly, for his part, had a decent Super Bowl, but it was nowhere close to the level of the first 2 playoff games that season. Still, at the end of the day, after all the running and the throwing, Kelly set up his kicker Scott Norwood with a chance to give the Bills their first ever Lombardi trophy, and we all know he whiffed wide left. Kelly's numbers weren't great, they weren't terrible, and whether it's the raw numbers or the advanced numbers, he didn't have a bad game. Passing value of 90 is really good, but because of the time of possession, Bill Belichick's famous game plan is in the Hall of Fame for this game. 2 212 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. He didn't lose the game. That's on Norwood, but he didn't win the game either. Looking at Kelly's 1990 postseason overall, the one thing that sticks out is it's not the most volume-based. He had barely one game with 30 pass attempts, but the efficiency was just off the charts. Passing value of almost 500 on just 83 dropbacks is crazy, believe me. Number 3, 2003, Jake Delhomme. Jake Delhomme and the Cardiac Cats, as they were known, came out of nowhere in 2003. Just a couple years prior, they'd been 1-15, and then John Fox got hired. They went 7-9 in 2002, and then Jake Delhomme popped up, and they went 11-5 and earned a wild card spot thanks to a bunch of close games that they won, with Delhomme racking up the game-winning drives. Delhomme's final stats in the regular season in 2003 weren't anything to write home about, but they weren't bad either. But come playoff time, he reached another level, starting with the wild card round versus the Dallas Cowboys. He averaged almost 10 yards per attempt in a 29-10 win and a 155.4 passing value. God, I just love seeing Cowboys lose. Isn't it so much fun? But everyone thought, oh, this guy's just a flash in the pan. We'll see what happens the next week when they went to play the greatest show on turf, and Delhomme just kept firing. And it was a game that famously went into double overtime that ended with Delhomme finding Steve Smith Sr. on a long touchdown to put the Panthers in the NFC Championship game. In that game, Delhomme finished with 290 yards passing, 96.6 passer rating, averaged over 11 yards per attempt. His turnover, though, and his sacks lowered his passing value, but still another very, very good game for Delhomme that improved the Panthers' chances of taking home a Super Bowl. As an Eagles fan, this is hard to watch, but Delhomme really didn't do much in the NFC Championship game in 2003 versus the Eagles. It was the defense that had 4 interceptions, including 3 off of Donovan McNabb, but Delhomme was steady, only throwing 14 passes for 101 yards with a touchdown pass, and really that was all that he needed, as the Eagles could only muster 3 points all game. This was the one mediocre game Delhomme had with just a 51 passer rating value, and it just, whatever. Anyway, that set up the Panthers with their first ever Super Bowl appearance versus Tom Brady and Bill Belichick with their budding dynasty, and it was a game of bipolarness. In the first and third quarters, Delhomme did nothing, but there were other moments where he just exploded in the second and the fourth quarter, particularly late in the quarters, and put up bonkers numbers, including throwing for over 300 yards against the best defense in the league. After a Tom Brady end zone interception, he found Musa Muhammad for an 85-yard go-ahead touchdown, but that didn't last very long as Brady checked down again to take the lead back by 7. But Delhomme was unfazed, once again leading the Panthers down and finding Ricky Prohl for the game-tying touchdown with 1:09 left. But because John Casey had to be a dick and kick the ball out of bounds, Brady got another head start, found a guy and set up Vinatieri to do the hard work, and Delhomme's incredible Super Bowl performance where he threw for 323 yards, 3 touchdowns with 113.6 passer rating, and a passing value of 234.2, which is insanely good. It all meant nothing. All those wins, nothing. 3 wins, nothing. It means you came home empty-handed. Delhomme finished the postseason with a stellar 106.1 passer rating and over 10 adjusted yards per attempt. He finished with 555.5 passing value. He had no stinkers, just an unbelievable playoff run where, ironically, his best performance was the game that he lost. Number 2, 2008, Kurt Warner. Kurt Warner, the Kawhi Leonard of the NFL. He wasn't good all the time, but when he was good, he was really, really good, and he kind of showed up out of nowhere. But whenever he made the playoffs, Kurt Warner always stepped his game. But he wasn't a slouch in the regular season in 2008 either, throwing for nearly 4,600 yards, 30 touchdowns, 14 picks, and 97 passer rating. But the Cardinals went just 9-7, so when they went into the postseason, nobody expected much from them. Facing off against rookie Matt Ryan and the Falcons in the wild card round, Warner did what he did best. He had a solid performance, not great. 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 94.7 passer rating, and that's reflected in the value. 75 passing value. He's a good, not great game. But hey, beating a rookie at home when you're a Super Bowl champion quarterback, whatever. They're still going to get knocked out. Now, ironically enough, his next performance would be against our last entrant on the list, Jake Delhomme, and this would be the game that ended Jake Delhomme's career when he got the yips. But not Kurt Warner's career, though, as he ended up, once again, throwing 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, having a decent, not great game. But he didn't need to have a great game because Jake Delhomme Mahomes self-combusted, throwing 5 interceptions, while the Cardinals won by 20 to advance to the NFC Championship game. Thus far through 2 games, Warner's postseason had been meh, but that would change in the NFC Championship game versus my Eagles. God damn it, I'm sick of my Eagles showing up on here. Warner's excellence helped the Cardinals storm out to a 24-6 lead, but the Eagles would not go away lightly, ripping off 19 straight points to go up 25-24 in the fourth quarter, and then Warner showed off his clutchness by throwing a touchdown and 2-point conversion to give the Cardinals a 32-25 win. Warner was stellar in this game, completing 75% of his passes for 4 touchdowns, 145.7. His passer rating was amazing. His passing value of 210 was great as well, and it sent the Cardinals to their first and only Super Bowl to this point. And for the first 3 quarters, Warner's Super Bowl performance was somewhat up and down. He threw a touchdown pass to make it 10-7, but he also had arguably the worst interception in Super Bowl history, besides Russell Wilson, when he threw a goal line interception just before halftime to James Harrison, who returned it over 100 yards, put the Steelers up 10 instead of the Cardinals taking the lead or being tied at halftime. But Warner would rally in the fourth, throwing 2 touchdown passes to Larry Fitzgerald, who himself had a historic postseason, including the go-ahead touchdown pass to Fitzgerald with about 2:40 left. But as we all know, bathroom Ben Roethlisberger would end up finding Santonio Holmes for the go-ahead touchdown with 36 seconds left again to put the Steelers up 4. Warner failed to get a Hail Mary attempt off. The Steelers recovered the fumble and won the Super Bowl 27-23. Warner's final numbers in the loss were stellar: 377 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 big interception with a 112.3 rating. Still, that was a historically great Steelers defense, so the numbers, defensive adjusted wise, 246.2 passing value should be more than good enough to win a game, but hey, shouldn't have thrown that pick 6. Overall, Warner's postseason numbers from 2008: 68 completion percentage, over 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns, 3 picks, 112.2 rating. Just stellar numbers all around. He also had 561.2 passing value added in 4 games. If you just prorate that over a 16-game season, that would be a historically great season. As think about 1984, Dan Marino's regular season was like over 2,200 or so. So that's really just a place of comparison, and it ended up with nothing. If he had one more stop, he would have been a Super Bowl champion. Fun fact, in all 3 of Kurt Warner's Super Bowl appearances, his offenses outscored the opponent's offenses, but he only has a 1-2 Super Bowl record because he threw a pick 6 in his 2 losses. And finally, we get to number 1. I'm sure you guys aren't surprised by this. It's 2016 Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan's 2016 season kind of came out of nowhere. It was stellar. He had no bad performances. You can say there were some games that he wasn't great, but he had no bad games. His worst passer rating in the season was 78.7. The fewest yards per attempt he had in any game was 7.9. He finished the season throwing just under 5,000 yards for 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, a 117.1 rating. He rightfully won NFL MVP. The Falcons went 11-5, and in the divisional round versus the Seahawks, Ryan continued his stellar play, throwing 338 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, a 125.7 rating. But thanks to Green Bay upsetting Dallas, the Falcons got to play at home in the NFC Championship game, and this was the best game of Matt Ryan's career, as he threw 4 touchdowns, even running for 1, had 392 yards passing, a passer rating of 139.4 in a 44-21 demolishing of Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. His passing value of 211.7 points is all-time great. And then finally, we get to the moment you've all been waiting for, which is the Super Bowl. For the first 2.5 quarters, Ryan was about as spectacular as you could be, and his final numbers still, even after the collapse, look great. He was 17 for 23, 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, a 144.1 passer rating, but he was sacked 5 times for 44 yards, and he also lost a crucial fumble, and the Falcons, as you all know, blew a 28-3 lead. There was about 30 different plays that could have gone either way. A game like this is a good example of why I think my formula is important, because if you look at Ryan's raw numbers, you would say, wow, he had a stellar game. But if you look at my numbers, especially at the passing value section, you'd say, well, he had a very good game, but not a great game, and certainly not as great as the game that he had the week before versus the Packers, even though he had a higher passer rating and completion percentage and things like that. So I do think that this shows pretty well that he had a good but not complete game. For the first 2.5 quarters, he was on track, and then the last quarter and a half, he just didn't do much, and it spoiled of what really should have been the greatest Super Bowl run ever. I mean, just look at the numbers for the season in that postseason. 71% completion, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, no picks, averaged 10.4 yards per attempt, and he was so close so many times. I can't even talk about it really without getting emotional. He was so close to greatness, and he never came as close ever again to make it that much more difficult of a pill to swallow. Well, that was my list. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you weren't too annoyed by my total value thing, but I just thought it was cool, and I did a lot of hard work to find out those numbers, so I figured I might as well put it into a video to show all of you.